Alright YouTube, it's time for Occult video number 18 on the topic of immortality. I was asked to do a video on what I thought about physical immortality. That is, the notion basically that through science or medicine, through some means, we can prolong our own life to the point where we become functionally immortal. You could still get killed, I guess, if you got injured heavily enough or if you got sick, but essentially, and this is actually a mainstream topic now within medicine as it regards telomeres, which protect DNA from being fucked with over time, thus causing aging. As far as anything goes outside of injury or sickness, yes, it is possible, and I'm sure it will eventually be done, and I think there are problems with such a thing being done. Yes, it will eventually happen that we possess the technology necessary to prevent people from dying. Now, as to should we do this, I think that's an ethical question that nobody really has an answer to. From the spiritual perspective, I already regard living things as immortal, because my belief in higher dimensions, the fact that I believe in the fourth dimension and the fact that when you've died in the third dimension, you're still persisting elsewhere, your actual self, your actual unique self, your ego, persisting elsewhere. That's what I believe. Whether or not it comes back to your mind in the same form or not means nothing. The ego is still there. It's reserved on the higher dimension, essentially, is what I believe. As far as spiritually, thus, I believe in immortality already. Now, the occult has always regarded things like immortality. We often hear about, for instance, the Sorcerer's Stone, which is actually called the Philosopher's Stone, which should give you an idea of the interplay between, when we read like philosophical works from the Renaissance, often they're regarded in the modern tense, in the modern sense, as being a grimoire, as being a work of literal occultism, literal ceremonial magic. Often what you're actually seeing is something that is coded, and it actually refers to science. It actually refers, I've talked about the Black Pullet referring explicitly, the Red Dragon, explicitly at the time referring to revolutionary era rhetoric and the concept that kings and states were fallen and corrupted and essentially needed to be done away with. Essentially what you're left with is a sort of philosophical manifesto, almost a libertarian manifesto in some ways, as Ragnar Redbeard's later work would be, and really informed all of this stuff to begin with. You're almost left with a pro-liberty tract that specifically the only lines that are actually relevant are those about the various virtues of these ceremonial workings, and the real meaning behind it is essentially, if you were to destroy these corrupted states, these are the things that you would be privy to. I see that at work in the Red Dragon, to a lesser degree in the Black Pullet and some of these other works. There are philosophical guides, they're scientific guides, all these alchemical workings that we regard, and which constantly talk about this transmutation of elements into gold, transmutation and creating immortality, the Fountain of Youth, the mythology behind that, El Dorado, all of these things fit right in with it. All of these things, in a literal context, refer to the occult. They refer to the spiritual. In a physical context, they refer not to actual immortality. In that sense, they refer to science, to man's workings, to man's medical lore, and the idea that you can prevent a great deal of tragedy through medical workings, through chemical workings, and things such as that. All of these herbals, they call upon various angels and various forces like that. In reality, they're simply a scientific manifest. As far as spiritual immortality goes, though, I believe, this is my belief, I don't pretend to know, that you are reserved upon death, that you are already essentially immortal, that the reason why you don't have, and I challenge anybody who says, well, I remembered my past life. I'll get into that. I'll get into that real good. I would challenge that. I believe that the reason that they wouldn't remember a past life is, of course, their old brain has been turned into a pile of mush and decomposed. It's essentially just a computer that operates the body they happen to be present in at any time. The idea of remembering your past lives, insofar as it regards spiritual immortality, that is reincarnation, I believe is impossible. And I preface this on the fact that whenever I talk to somebody who claims to remember a past life, it's always an astonishingly interesting past life. They were Napoleon, or Adolf Hitler, or some king or noble. But most people who have ever existed in this world have been landless peasants, or slaves, or have died at a very young age. These are the lives that nobody seems to remember. Well, why is that? It's because that these people aren't actually remembering past lives. Reincarnation doesn't work that way. No, you were not a king in the past life and then a priest before, and then some great hero before. Most of your lives would have been relatively mundane. I know that there are some Eastern scholars who will say, yes, but individuals might ascend, and so they might have a number of what we would consider relatively fantastic lives. No. That karmic process I deny the existence of, because I can see no way in which it can be reconciled with science, with what we know to be established reality and or theoretical physics. As far as physical immortality goes, it will be a function of one of several things. There are already those that are trying to download people's brains and memories and thoughts and stuff onto computers. I think that's creepy. And ultimately, if I was given the choice to be cryogenically frozen until 1,000 years from now, or to be downloaded into a computer for safekeeping, to be put in a biological body later, I would not take that opportunity. Because I do not believe that the cycle of life that goes on all around us is bad, or scary, or anything like that. I look at it as innate. It is natural. We see it around us all the time. Biological matter, when it's degraded, it gets absorbed into other biological matter. Well, then it's alive again. It's part of a living thing. There's really only a fine line between the matter composing something that happens to be alive and aware of its own existence, and something that's alive but not really aware of its existence, or something that's not alive at all. There's a very fine line between these two things. The atoms that compose your body, the molecules that compose your body, are not readily differentiated from the atoms and molecules of any other living thing. The atoms specifically aren't even easily differentiated from a non-living object, such as a rock or a pile of anaerobic mush. There's really not that much of a difference between these two things. I happen to thus believe that there is some uniqueness to life. I believe that the self-awareness that goes along with it, and the lesser state, let's face it, of self-awareness that goes along with other biological life forms is unique. Does this mean it was fated by some singular monotheistic male god who happens to be Jewish? No, I don't believe in such a thing, but I think there is something behind the existence of awareness that goes further than simply, abiogenesis, things just evolved over time. I like to think that self-awareness is quite a logical leap from the sort of life we see on the early planet, and that evolution in its strictest sense cannot explain every part of it. Most of it, yes, of course, I believe in evolution. I believe in natural selection. I think in the case of humans, and maybe hominids in some of these groups, I think an argument can be made that some meddling was done there. And no matter if I believe in evolution, it still doesn't explain how existence came to be, if it came to be at all. It doesn't explain the very existence of life in any sense, because it fails to explain why physical laws are there. It can quantify them, it can explain them, but ultimately it falls short at these goals. And so I think the jury's still out on cosmic importance as far as it goes towards human beings or any other sentient races that may be out there in the stars, which I also believe in. I do believe in space aliens. Yes, biological immortality is possible. However, biological invincibility is a totally different thing altogether. If you were to manipulate your genetics and become, for all intents and purposes, immortal, you would never age. You could prevent yourself from getting sick. You could cloister yourself away and prevent yourself from getting injured. What kind of a life would it be? It would be a very boring life. I'll tell you why. The reason why death and reincarnation, which I believe is true, sounds so much more appealing than simply living forever in one biological form is specifically, you can come back as a space alien, you can come back as, a fox, you can come back as a maybe a plant or something like that, not even be aware of yourself for a while. That sounds pretty fun. All the pain that may be contained in those many mortal incarnations may be unpleasant, yes, but there's a great deal of pleasantness going on as well. If a biological life form was incapable of feeling pleasure and was just in pain constantly, well, it wouldn't be a dynamic living thing. It would drive itself to extinction. We have to regard the fact that any life form that persists for any great length of time anywhere in the universe is capable of actually living within its actual surroundings, because otherwise it wouldn't be alive at all. And so I don't have any fear of reincarnating as, some horrible, slave to a race of alien demons or something like that, because I say, well, under those conditions, eventually order breaks down and you have an end to that sort of level of slavery. And I don't believe in karma, so there would be no reason for me to regard that as a likely possibility. But a life lived as an immortal within this very finite world that we live in, which eventually, let's face it, is going to get engulfed by the sun anyway, that doesn't appeal to me. The idea of having to stay in one incarnation and be myself forever doesn't sound fun. There's also the added issue of, again, even if you can treat all of these diseases and so forth, you would still have the possibility of injury. You would still have natural disasters that would kill people and wreck their bodies beyond the capability to then repair them. Even if you're like backing up people's brains and like cloning them or something, is there any real guarantee from the perspective of physics that it's even the same being? Maybe it's just a being that's totally separate but identical to the original, in which case it's not even the same person. It may look the same, it may act the same, it may think that it's the same, but it's not the same. It's got a totally different ego. What's the point? I oppose human cloning on that same basis. I think it's a terrible idea. I think that you can make an argument, and I've made this argument before, I don't have any problem, as long as it's done ethically, the animals, not being mistreated or, just constantly tested or in isolation forever. It's allowed to go out in the wild. I have no problem with cloning some woolly mammoths, releasing them into Siberia or northern Canada, and letting them go live their lives. Because, let's face it, humans may have been responsible for them dying off in the first place. I'd say the same about dire wolves, the giant sloth, the dodo, the great ack, Tasmanian tiger. Yes, if you want to, or rhinoceros, something like that that's not quite extinct yet but will be soon in the future. By the way, the black rhino will go extinct in the next few years. Sorry to say that. So will the tiger. There will be no tigers left on this planet in a good 10 or 20 years probably. Yeah, that's totally different than the idea of cloning without the necessity of doing so. Human beings are in no danger of going extinct except if they destroy themselves. Well, if we're dumb enough to do that, we probably deserve it. And we might as well look at ourselves as a billions of years old lineage, a failed branch of our own planet's evolution. As far as biological immortality goes, of course it's possible. Anyone who has ever said that something is impossible, it's impossible to fly, it's impossible to go faster than the speed of sound, it's impossible to step foot on the moon, it's impossible to shoot something into orbit around the planet, it's impossible to see beyond our general region of the galaxy. The galaxy's all there is. There's no universe. Anyone who has ever said anything like that has eventually been proven wrong. Anyone saying it's impossible to become biologically immortal is wrong. It's only a matter of time before our technology, which is rapidly increasing by orders of magnitude every decade or so, allows us to do that. Allows us to lengthen the telomeres, to fool around with every organ system, including, by the way, the human brain. Yes, it will eventually be possible to completely cyborg yourself up and hatch a bunch of computers into your brain to utterly alter the way that you see the world around you. It will be possible. It's already beginning to happen now. There are already people with bionic implants. We are very close to that sort of transhumanist age. Does this mean that it's a good thing? No. It does not objectively mean that in any given sense. It is subjectively good to those who see it as good. It is subjectively bad to those who see it as bad. And if we do not rein it in, if we simply allow it to go on unchecked on all sides and allow the technology to get greater and greater and greater, there will come a time at which there will be a wealthy elite of immortals ruling this world. and the rest of the people will largely be kept under the thumb of a robotic army or something. That could happen. The fact that it happens to be in the realm of sci-fi now is also meaningless, because unfortunately, science fiction often turns into science fact at an uncanny level within a few decades of it being released, or within a century of it being released or something. Time travel. I would say the same thing. I believe time travel is possible. Does this mean that we will discover it before we get wiped out? Hopefully not. I hope that it doesn't happen. I hope that the fact that we don't readily see time travelers around us already means we don't develop it in the future and actually die off before that happens. I can't think of anything more miserable than the sort of world that's believed in by some of these groups as possible and even laudable. I can't think of anything worse than that. The opposite would be, the opposite is we wipe ourselves out and go back to the Stone Age or something. I think that you could make a reasoned argument that it would be better to be Stone Age hominids than transhumanists. I think that you could make a legitimate argument for that. Transhuman in the biological sense, not necessarily, well, we need to alter man's philosophy and get it in tune with this principle and that principle. Yeah, you can make it, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. As far as the idea of people walking around with like android components and living for 500 years, I don't think that world appeals to me. I also think we should probably cure certain mental illnesses first, like, neurodegradation, like Alzheimer's and prions. I think it might be a good idea to tackle those before we begin lengthening people's telomeres. Otherwise, we're going to have a lot of people who live to be 150, 160 years old and spend half of their existence not knowing who they are. I think that is unethical. I think we need to tackle those problems first, and from a spiritual perspective, I am absolutely ambivalent towards whether man ever even develops such capabilities. I look towards medicine, and I say we can grow organs, we can seamlessly, we can transplant penises now, which I'm sure is great news for some people. We can do all of these things. We can grow and graft skin onto people. We can treat genetic illnesses we never could before through the use of stem cells. We can do all sorts of amazing things to make people's lives better. That doesn't necessarily mean we need to apply them to making them longer, because I don't see that cycle of life and death, which I see as flip sides of the same ever-spinning coin, as a bad thing. I have absolutely no fear of death whatsoever. I've already almost died a couple times. And to tell the truth, when I was completely out of it and unaware of my surroundings, it felt a lot like not existing at all. It wasn't painful. It wasn't a sense of sadness and despondency. It wasn't infuriating. It was a sense of release. I didn't care because I wasn't there. I think it was Twain who said something along the lines of he was dead long before he was born and suffered not the slightest inconvenience from it, and so he didn't fear death. I take up much the same line. Well, you didn't exist, or you existed but in a different form anyway, which is basically, let's face it, the same thing for all intents and purposes for whatever body you happen to inhabit at a time. You didn't exist before. You weren't in pain. You weren't, in absolute crushing loneliness or anything like that. You simply started existing. And I see this as a weird, paradoxical situation. You could get a whole bunch of stoners together and they debate it to no end about, man, where was I before I was born? Man, it's so weird that I'm actually alive right now. It's weird that I'm actually able to observe my surroundings. Remembering, of course, that your body is mostly empty space. And what's not empty space is mostly non-biological material. In fact, the weight of your body is partially composed of other life forms, like mitochondria, that have their own DNA, and macrophages, and all of those things that are kind of their own sentient little living critters. Yes, you're full of bacteria and bugs, okay? Get over it. And your, hair follicles are full of worms and stuff. Sad but true, you're covered in parasites right now. No, I don't fear death. As far as immortality goes, if somebody really wants to make themselves immortal, and they think it's important to do so, unfortunately, there's really nothing that's going to stop them from doing that. because there will be people that will put that at the highest importance, and they'll be the people who have a lot of money and power, and you can guarantee they will not allow any law to be passed to stop them from doing this, and in turn they'll give the carrot before the stick, and they'll make sure that military generals and politicians live forever, and they'll probably abolish term limits, and then you can look forward to a worldwide authoritarian dictatorship or something. That's what you can look forward to in your future if that sort of technology takes hold. It will not be a good future. Which is why I'm glad I'll probably die before that future actually comes into being. The idea that because it was in sci-fi, it'll never come true, has been disproven over and over. The fact that people say it's impossible now simply reflects that it's impossible with our current technology. But every time they try to objectively claim something like that, you can't fly, you can't go to the moon, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't split the atom, it comes true. Every single time that there is a significant crowd of naysayers, it turns out that they were wrong. Therefore, I have no reason to believe it won't eventually happen. Yes, biological immortality will eventually become possible. Cheap? Maybe not. Able to be afforded by any but the richest and most powerful individuals? Maybe not. I think we could make an argument, though, as I said, that it's really... we should really be tackling things like actual disease when you've got infant mortality at such a high rate in some parts of the world. I think we've got better things to do than worrying about taking some aging elitist with $1 billion and making them immortal when they're already insufferable to begin with, and hopefully the world refuses to bend to their will and executes them rather than dealing with them should such a thing happen. Hopefully they will understand that their own freedom and liberty will be utterly demolished if such a thing ever happens. I think it was Keanu Reeves that somebody like sees his face in some Renaissance era painting and swears he's immortal. If that's the case, then yeah, I guess that's okay. It's okay for Keanu Reeves to be immortal. You know, some of these other people, I think Tom Hanks was another one. Somebody saw, someone who looked exactly the same in like an 18th century portrait. I can deal with that. That's all right. And I have no problem with, secret time-traveling immortal people. But when it becomes like a mainstream medical technology, there's going to be some severe ethical dilemmas on this planet. As far as the occult goes, though, you're already immortal, so stop worrying about it. That's about all.